Welcome to part 1 of this Blender tutorial series, where we'll be creating this animated, stylized forest meadow. So in this 6-part tutorial series, we'll be creating this animated, stylized forest meadow scene, and we'll be rendering this with Blender Eevee. And this entire tutorial series will be completely free on my YouTube channel. So in this part, in part 1, we're going to be modeling the stylized low poly trees, and then we'll be adding a wind animation to the trees. Then in part 2, we're going to be modeling the grass and the plants and the flowers, and we'll also be adding the same wind animation to those objects. Then in part 3, we're going to be doing the scene setup, so we'll be adding the lighting, we'll also be adding the sky background, and we'll be modeling the plane and the ground. Then in part 4, we're going to be using geometry nodes to place all of the nature assets in the scene, and we'll also be using weight painting to weight paint where we want the nature to be on the ground. Then in part 5, we're going to be modeling the butterfly, and we'll be animating the butterfly's wings flapping, and I'll show you how to animate the butterfly moving throughout the scene. And then in the final part, in part 6, we'll be animating the camera, and then we'll render all the frames to images, and then we'll be using Blender's video editor to compile the frames together. We'll add some sound effects and music to get the finished animated video. So as I mentioned, the entire tutorial series will be completely free here on my YouTube channel, and these free videos wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for my supporters. So if you'd like to join my supporters in helping out this channel, then a great way to do that is by checking out my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. And on my Gumroad store and Patreon page, you can get access to lots of Blender content like 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node modifier setups, and so much more Blender content. So if you'd like to make a one-time purchase of one of my products, then my Gumroad store is a great place to do that. Or if you'd like to help support the channel monthly, then joining one of my Patreon memberships is a great way to do that. And if you're interested, you can also purchase the finished project files of this tutorial, and in the project files, you'll get the finished Blender file and all the 3D assets and the resources used to create this tutorial. So if you're interested in purchasing the tutorial files, the links to that will be in the description. Now I will be using a few different free resources online in the tutorial, and I'll have all the links in the description to the free resources if you'd like to download them and use the same ones that I'm using. So here on Pixabay, I'll be downloading this free butterfly texture, and we'll be adding this onto the butterfly model. So you can just make a free account with Pixabay and then just download the image. And I downloaded the highest resolution. Now at the end of the tutorial series, when we do the video editing, I'm going to be adding in some nature sound effects. So I'm going to be downloading this horse walks in mud on the farm ambience, and this is from freesound.org. Now I'm actually using this sound effect because this sound effect has a really great cricket sound, which is right about here in the audio. And on freesound.org, I'll also be downloading this morning bird sound effect, and again we'll be putting this in the background to get some nice nature ambience. And if you want to use the same music that I'll be using in my finished animation, then here on filmmusic.io, I'll be downloading this childhood music. And this is just a really nice, relaxing, calming music, which is great for adding to the 3D scene. Alright, so here we are in a new scene in Blender, and currently as I record this, the latest stable version of Blender is Blender 4.1, so that's what I'll be using in this tutorial. And I'll also have my screencast keys right down here in the corner, so you can see what buttons I'm pressing. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just change this over to Blender Eevee. So here on the render engine, I'll be using Eevee, and then when you change this over to Blender Eevee, there's a few settings we can change. So to make the viewport faster, I can just turn this way down to maybe just like a 5, and the render here, I could just turn that to like a 30. And then also to make Eevee look a bit nicer, I'll be turning on the ambient occlusion and the screen space reflections, and then also the motion blur. So we're going to start by modeling the tree, so we'll be modeling the tree trunk. So let's just select everything in the scene, and I'll hit X and we'll just delete everything. So I'll now go to the add menu and I'll go here to mesh, and I'm going to add a cylinder. And I want to model these objects closer to the real life scale in Blender, and these default objects are quite large. They're a bit larger than an average human. So I will scale this tree trunk down. I'll type in 0.2 and then enter, and then I will press Ctrl A and apply the scale, so that's the object's new default size. Let's save this Blender file, so let's just click on File and we can click on Save As. And just save your project files somewhere on your computer. I'll just call it Forest, and I'll just click on Save As, and then as you're working on the project, you can press Ctrl S to save it. So let's now go into edit mode, and we're going to model the tree trunk. So I'll click here to go to the face select. Let's just select the top face, and I'll bring it up on the Z axis like that. And then also let's select the bottom one here, and we'll scale it out just a little bit. And then I want to extrude this down and create the roots. So I'll extrude this with the E key, and I can scale the entire thing up a bit, maybe make it a bit bigger, and then extrude the whole thing down. And then this bottom face here, I don't need it, so I'll hit X to delete, and we'll just delete the faces. And then let's select some of these faces here, and I want to turn on the proportional editing. So I will click on this button right here to turn on proportional editing. So now if I hit G to grab, you can see that the other faces nearby are going to pull around with it. And you can use your scroll wheel to make the proportional editing bigger or smaller. And I'm going to have some roots, which are kind of just coming out of the tree. So something like that. Maybe go here to the edge select and select some of these bottom edges and kind of pull these out as well. And then select some other edges and bring them in. Maybe bring this edge in here. And then another one here, kind of pull that out just to make some roots, which are kind of coming out of the tree. This one here, maybe bring this one out a bit. Maybe select these two here and pull them out a little bit. And I'll go back to the face select, maybe bring this in here and then bring this one out. And if this bottom loop of vertices isn't quite flat, you can go here to the vertex select. You can hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices, and we're going to scale it. We're going to scale it on the Z axis, and I can type 0 and enter just to flatten it. Let's also hold down the Alt key, select that loop of vertices there, and it'll bring it up a little bit on the Z axis, and then I can press Ctrl B to add a bevel, just so it's a bit of a smoother transition. Let's go back to object mode, and we'll use the object context menu to shade it smooth. So now you can see we have the base of the tree with the tree trunk. Let's also go back into edit mode, and I'm going to scale everything down on the Z axis so it's a bit more flat, and then I can bring everything up on the Z axis, and I want the origin point to be roughly about here, maybe just bring it down a little bit. So I want the origin point to be kind of here, because wherever the origin point is, that is where it's going to be distributed on the ground. All right, so something like that is pretty good. Let's go back into edit mode, and I can go to the face select. We'll select this face here, and we'll hit X, and we'll just delete the faces because we don't need that. And then let's go back here to the vertex select. I'll hold down the Alt key and just select that loop of vertices there, and I'll press 1 on the numpad to go to front view. We can scale it and kind of move it up, and then I can extrude it up and scale it down, and extrude it up again, make it much longer and scale it down. All right, something like that. Maybe Alt select that loop there and scale that loop down a bit so it gets thinner as it goes up. So let's go back to object mode. I'll save this again, and that is going to be it for the tree trunk. So I now want to make the tree leaves. So I'll press Shift C to make sure the 3D cursor is in the very center of the scene, and I'll go to the add menu, and let's go to mesh, and we're going to add an icosphere. And right behind me, if you click on the add icosphere settings and open this up, I'm going to turn these subdivisions up to 4, and then I can close the add icosphere settings. Now what I want to do is press Ctrl 1, and Ctrl 1 is going to add the subdivision surface, and we want the levels viewport to be at 1. But then I actually want to apply this so that it is actual geometry, because I just want a little bit more detail. So I'll click on the drop down and click on apply. So you can go into edit mode and you can see it's actual geometry. Let's go back to object mode, and I'll use the object context menu and shade it smooth, and then I can bring it up on the Z axis, and we'll bring it up here to the top of the tree. So I'll now go into edit mode, and I want to make sure that the proportional editing is turned on, and I'm just going to select some of the vertices, and I'll hit G to grab, and I can just move some of the shapes around, and I just want to make it kind of look blobby and kind of look like the shape of the top of the tree. And I actually need to select everything, and I'll scale everything up quite a bit bigger and maybe bring it down a little bit. All right, something like that is pretty good. And then just kind of make it blobby and make it the shape of kind of a stylized tree. Just make it kind of random. And maybe the top here, bring the top up a little bit. And this bottom part here, maybe bring the bottom up a little bit so it's a little bit more flat. Alright, so something like that is pretty good, so I'll go back to object mode, and I now want to make it a bit more lumpy by adding a modifier. So let's click on add modifier, and I'm going to search for the displace modifier, and then let's click on new here to add a new texture. And this texture here, I'm just going to call it tree leaves. And then to actually choose a texture, we're going to click on this button right here, and this is going to take us to the texturing panel here. And instead of image or movie, I'm going to choose clouds, which is basically Blender's procedural noise texture. And then I can change the scale of the texture, so I might make it a little bit bigger. And then if I click back here to go back to the modifiers, I can turn this strength way down because I don't want it to be that strong. And I think maybe a 0.25 is a little bit better because I don't want it to be too bumpy. So then let's click on the drop down, and we're going to click on apply just to apply that. So if I go into edit mode, you can see the displacement is actual geometry. Now I actually want the trees and the trunk to be one object, so I'll select the leaves and then shift select the trunk, and I can press Ctrl J to join it together into one object. So now let's create the materials for the tree. So I'm going to click right over here to go to the shading workspace, and let's click on new to add a new material, and I'm going to call this trunk, and then we'll be making the other material after. So just for now, I'm going to hold down the Z button and move my mouse into the material preview so I can see what the material is looking like, because we haven't done the lighting yet of the scene. So let's create a simple stylized trunk material. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the noise texture. Let's drop the noise texture down here. And then I will be using the Node Wrangler add-on to preview the different nodes throughout the tutorial series. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on edit, and you can go to the preferences. And then if you go over here to the add-ons tab, you can go to the search, and you can search for Node Wrangler and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on. And then you can save the preferences so that the Node Wrangler add-on is always enabled. And then let's close the user preferences. So if you hold down the Control and Shift key and then select different nodes, that is going to preview the node on the object. That is the feature of the Node Wrangler add-on. We can also select the noise texture, and I'm going to press Ctrl T to add the texture coordinate and mapping node. That is another feature of the Node Wrangler. And then I want to use the object coordinates because the object coordinates will place the texture on the object more evenly. So I'll put the object into the mapping. Now to make this look more like tree bark, I want to stretch the noise texture. So here on this Z value, I'll turn this to a negative 0.15, just a negative 0.15. So you can see the Z value is kind of stretching it up and down. And then there's also the Y and the X, but we're going to leave those how they are. I'm just going to stretch the Z value. So you can see now it's going up. And then here on this noise texture, let's change some of the settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to like a 20, and I'll also turn the detail to the max of 15. And this roughness here, I'll turn it up to like a 0.55, so it's a little bit more rough. So now you can see that's starting to look a bit like tree bark. Now I want to create some colors, and then we'll add that into the base color. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the color ramp. We'll put the color ramp here after the factor, and let's also drag these nodes back a bit. And this color here can go into the base color of the principled shader. And then let's change a few of the settings of the color ramp. So I first want to make the black parts a little bit stronger. So I'm going to drag this black value over here so it's a bit darker. And then this black color, if I click on the color, I'm going to make this a nice dark brown. And then also here for the white color, this is going to be a nice light brown. And if you want to use the exact same colors that I'm using, then this dark brown is going to be a hex value of 2F1D09. So you can punch that into the color if you want to use the exact color that I'm using. And then this light color here, this is going to be a hex value of 623C0E. And then let's Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. And I want to make the bark look a bit more rough. So this roughness value, I'll turn up to like a 0.65. So it's a bit more rough. And then you can see it's very smooth right now, and I want to add some bump. So let's put the factor value into the normal to give it some bump. But then we need to convert the noise texture data into normal data. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the bump, and we'll put the bump here after the noise texture, stick it there. And then we actually want the factor to be going into the height value of the bump, and that'll convert it to bump data. So you can see now the bark looks nice and bumpy, but it is a bit too strong. So I'll turn this strength value to just like a 0.15. So it's a bit less bumpy. So there we go. We now have a nice basic stylized bark material. So let's now create the leaf material. So I'm going to open up the side panel here, and let's click here to go to the material properties. And I'm going to click on the plus here to add a new material in the slot. Let's click on new, and then I can double click on this to rename it, and I'll just rename it to leaves. And then I'll go into edit mode. I'll deselect everything and just press the L key with my mouse hovered over the top of the tree, and then click on the leaves and you can click on assign. And I'll go back to object mode. So now let's create the procedural material for the leaves. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a noise texture. And let's control shift and select the noise texture to preview it. And also with the noise texture selected, I'll press control T, and that was going to add the texture, coordinate, and mapping nodes. Now later in this tutorial series, we are going to be using the displace modifier to animate the leaves looking like they're being blown in the wind. And so I don't actually want to use the object coordinates, because if I use the object coordinates, then the noise texture isn't actually going to stay on the part of the mesh. It's going to look like it's kind of moving through the mesh. So I'm going to use the generated coordinates instead, so that whatever part of the texture is on the object, that'll stay with the object when the modifier moves it around. So we'll use the generated coordinates, and then we can also change some of the noise texture settings. So I'll turn the scale to a 20, also turn the detail to the max of 15. And then I want to make the colors to look like the green leaves. So I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for the color ramp. And we'll put the color ramp here after the noise texture. And let's drag these nodes back, and the color ramp color, this can go into the base color, and I can control shift and select the principled shader to preview it. And then let's change some of the colors here. So for this black color here, this is going to be a lighter green color. So we'll make it kind of like a light green, maybe a little bit darker. And then this one here, this is going to be a similar green color, but it will be a bit darker. And if you want to use the exact same colors that I'm using, then the lighter green is going to be a hex value of 68951C, and then this darker green, this is going to be a hex value of 3D620D. Now, when I duplicate each tree, I want each tree to have a slightly different variation of color to make it look a bit more random and natural. So what I'm going to do is go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the mix color. We'll put the mix color after the color ramp. And then I'm going to take this same color here, and I'm going to put that up to color B. So now I can change the colors. So I'll go to the add menu, and to change the colors, I can just add the hue saturation value. And I'll stick this here in between the color ramp and color B, and then I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and I'll drop another one here between the color and color A. So now if I control shift and select this hue saturation value, you can see I can turn the value down, and I'm going to turn it down to like a 0.4 so you can see the tree is darker. And then also if I control shift and select this hue saturation value, this one I can turn up to a 1.1. So if I control shift and select between them, you can see we have two different shades of green. Now if I control shift and select the mix here, this mix here is going to blend between using the lighter one or the darker one. But I want each tree to be a randomly different color. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the object info node, and let's stick this here over the hue saturation values, and the random, this can go into the factor. So now I can control shift and select the principled shader to preview it. So you don't have to follow along with this part, but I'm just going to show you what it's doing. So if I press Shift D to duplicate the tree, now every time I duplicate the tree, you can see that each tree is going to be a randomly different color. So some of them are lighter and some of them are darker, and it will randomly be generated between this one and this one every time they're duplicated. So I'll just delete those extra trees because we don't need them. We'll select this tree again, and I'll just preview the principled shader. And then I do want to make the leaves a bit more rough. So this roughness here, I'll turn this to like a 0.9. So it's more rough. So I now want to add that displace modifier to animate the leaves and make it look like they're blowing in the wind. But before I do that, I need to animate another object, and then that other object is going to control the noise displacement and where the noise is. So I'll press Shift C to make sure the 3D cursor is in the center of the scene. Let's actually go back here to the layout, and I'll go to the add menu, and I'm just going to add an empty plane axis, and I'm adding the empty object because empty objects won't be visible in the render because they don't have any visible faces. But you can really use any object, but it just shouldn't be visible to the camera. So if you want to go here to empty and add other empties, you can. So I'm going to go to top view, and I want to animate this. So I'm pressing the 7 on the numpad to go to top view. So I'm going to hit G to grab, and I'm going to bring this back right over here. And you can see if I zoom out, Blender has these grids here, and I want to bring it over here by 1 grid. So I now want to insert a keyframe here. So I'm going to press the K key, and the K key is going to bring up the insert keyframe menu. And that is a new shortcut of Blender version 4.1. So if you're using an older version of Blender, then you'll press the I key instead, but I'm going to press the K key because that's the new shortcut. And I'm just going to insert a location keyframe. Now my animation is going to be 500 frames long. You could totally change that depending on how long you want it to be, but here on this end frame here on the timeline, I'm going to change this to 500 frames. So I'm now just going to go to frame 500 by just dragging right here and going to frame 500, or you can go one frame over the end frame if you want to. And I now want to move this over by 3 Blender grids. So I'll hit G to grab, and I'm going to bring it over on the x-axis, and I'll bring it over by 1, 2, 3 Blender grids, so stick it there. And then I'll hit the K button again, and we'll insert location. So if I press the space bar to play this, you can see there are 2 keyframes at the starting of the ending, and the empty is moving. Now the empty is starting out very slow and then speeding up, and then at the end it slows down. So to fix this problem, you can press the A key in the timeline to select the keyframes, and I'm going to hit the T key to bring up the set keyframe interpolation menu, and I'm going to choose linear. This way the keyframes are linear, so this way the empty moves at a consistent speed throughout the entire animation. Let's press Ctrl S to save the project again. So I now want to add the displace modifier to make the leaves being displaced. So I'll click on the tree here, let's click on add modifier, and I can add another displace modifier, and then let's click on new here to add a new texture, and I'm going to rename this texture, and I'm going to rename it to tree wind noise. And then we actually need to change the texture, so let's click over here to go to the texturing panel, and instead of image or movie, I'm going to change this to the clouds again. And here on the size, I find that a size of 6 looks pretty good, so I'll change the size to 6. So let's go back over here to the modifier properties. Now you can see that it is displacing it, and we can also change the strength, but it isn't actually being animated to look like wind. So to fix this, we want to change the coordinates to object instead. And then here on the object coordinates, you can click here and choose the empty, or you can click on the eyedropper and just click on the empty. So I'll just choose the empty. So now you can see that because this object here is moving, that is going to move along the cloud's texture. And then this strength is a bit too strong, so I'll turn the strength down to like a 0.6, so it's not quite as strong. Now there is a problem, and that is that the trunk is also moving around, and I don't want the trunk to be moving. So we can actually use this vertex group setting right here to make it so just the tree or the top of the tree is going to be moving by the wind. So let's click here to go to the object data properties, and then what I want to do is open up the vertex groups, and I'll go into edit mode of the object. And then just hover your mouse over just the top of the tree and press the L key just to select the leaves. I'm now going to click on the plus here to make a new vertex group, and we can name the vertex group to leaves on tree or whatever you want to call it, and then click on the assign button. This way there's just going to be a vertex group for just the top of the leaves. And so now what we can do is go back to object mode and go here to the modifier properties, and here on the vertex group you can choose the leaves on tree. And now what's happening is the displace modifier is only affecting the vertices which are in the vertex group, and so the trunk isn't going to be moving. Now here on the direction, you could leave it set to normal, and normal is going to move it out depending on the direction of the face, but here on the direction, I'm going to change this to X instead, and so that way it'll move it along the X axis, and I think that looks a bit better for wind. Alright, so I'll press the space bar to stop the animation, and I'm now just going to create 2 more variations of the tree. So I'll hold down the Z button and go into the material preview just so I can see the materials, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate and bring this one over here, and let's just make a bit of a variation. So I'll go into edit mode, and I'm first going to make a bit of a variation here on the trunk, so I can go down here to the trunk and make sure the proportional editing is turned on, and I'm just going to move around the vertices to kind of change it just to make it look a bit more unique and different. So I'll move those vertices around. Maybe right here I can kind of pull this out, and then right here I can push this back in a bit, and let's go right over here, maybe push this back in a little bit, something like that, just to make it look a bit different. And you can also select everything and rotate it around on the Z-axis so it has a slightly different rotation. All right, something like that. And then let's go up here to the top, and for the top here, I'm gonna pull this out here. Now you can see if I pull this out too far, the trunk is gonna move along with it. So let's click right here on the settings of the proportional editing, and I'm gonna choose connected only. This way, if I move the proportional editing, it's only gonna move around the vertices which are connected to the vertex which is selected. So you can see now the trunk isn't moving. So now let's just make it a little bit different. So I might make this tree a little bit more flat, maybe bring it out a little bit, and just make it a little bit more random and make it look a bit more unique. And I think I might make this a bit longer, so kind of pull that out there. All right, that is pretty good. Maybe bring this in a little bit and bring this in a bit. But then something else that I want to do is add a few branches. So what I'm going to do is zoom in here, and I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to add a cylinder. And if I zoom out here, the cylinder has been added over here, and right behind me on the add cylinder settings, I want to make this lower poly. So I'm going to change the vertices to an 8, and we can close those settings. Let's now bring this over here, and I can scale it down here. And we actually don't need the top and bottom faces here. So if we go to the face select, I can select this face and we'll delete the faces, and also this face here, delete the faces. And then press the L key to select that entire piece, and I'll scale it down and bring it up here. Let's bring it here and kind of rotate it. And we're just going to bring it in here and stick it in the trunk. So something like that, bring that over there, scale it down, and then I can go here to the vertex select, and I'll hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices, and I can extrude it and scale it. We'll make it a bit smaller, all right, like that, and then extrude it again and kind of scale it down and extrude it up here into the tree. All right, just like that. And if I go back to object mode, I can use the object context menu, and we're going to shade that smooth. And then I do want to have one more branch, so I'll go back into edit mode. First though, I'm going to go to wireframe, and I'll select that loop there and kind of scale it up a little bit so it's a little bit thicker. And then what I'll do is press the L key to select the linked vertices, and I can duplicate this, and let's rotate it around on the Z axis, and we'll make another branch. And this branch could be maybe a bit smaller, and I'll kind of bring it up here, maybe rotate it a little bit like that. I can also press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I can left click and then left click again, and maybe move that over just so that it's a little bit more smooth. All right, so something like that. Maybe also select this entire thing here and scale it down a little bit more. And I might want to bring all the branches down just a little bit more on the Z axis. All right, let's press Ctrl S to save. That is it for the next one. And then I want to create one more. So I'll select this one here again. I'll press Shift D to duplicate it and bring it right over here. And then let's actually select this one here, and I'll go into edit mode, and I'll deselect everything. Just press the L key to select that one branch, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and we're going to bring it over here on the X-axis. And then to separate this into its own object, I'll press the P key, and we're going to separate by selection. I can go back to object mode, so now you can see this object and this object are separate. So I'll select the branch and then hold down the Shift key and select this tree, and I'll press Ctrl J to join them together so they're one object. And then let's select the entire branch and move it over here a bit so it's out of the way. So then for this one here, I want to again use the proportional editing, and I'm going to make it a bit more random so I can scroll my mouse wheel to make the proportional editing bigger. Let's also bring this back a little bit. And this branch here, or this tree, I want to have a bigger branch, and then I also want to have another clump of leaves. So let's just move these over here, move this over here, just make it a bit more random and unique. And then I will press the L key with my mouse hovered over that branch, and I'm going to scale the branch up. Let's stick it inside the trunk there, and I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse into wireframe, and I can just box select some pieces here and kind of rotate them just so that they come out a bit farther so they're out of the way here. So kind of bring that over, and to bring the entire top of the tree over, I'll press the L key to select the top here, and then I can press the B key and click and drag and box select the top, and I can bring it over a little bit, kind of bring it over like that, and then go back to solid view, and I want to bring it over so that we have space here to make the other clump. Let's also hold down the Alt key and select that loop right there of vertices. I can press Ctrl B to add a bevel, and I can scroll out my mouse wheel till we have a few cuts of the bevel, and then we can also rotate this and kind of bring it over, and rotate this and kind of bring that over, just so that the tree trunk kind of curves over a little bit. All right, so now what I'm going to do is press the L key with my mouse hovered over this piece, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and we can scale it down, and I want to stick it here and just stick it right there on the top of that branch. Maybe rotate it, give it a random rotation, and then we can just change the shape, make the shape a bit more random, and I want to make this be a bit more of a circular shape. Alright, so that's going to be it for my tree, so I'll go back to object mode and I'll press Ctrl S to save, and now I just want to organize the scene before I finish up this part. So what I'm going to do is open up this outliner here, and I'm going to right click, we'll click on new collection, and I can double click on this collection to rename it, and I'll rename it to trees. And then if I shift select all the trees, I'll press the M key, and I'm going to move them into the trees collection. Now this collection here, this has the empty, so I'm going to double click on this to rename it, and I'll just rename it to empties because we will have one other empty later when we do the depth of field. So now we have an empty collection and then a tree collection, and I can also rename these trees, so I'll double click on them and I'll rename it to tree 1 and also tree 2 and tree 3. Alright, I'll press Ctrl S to save, and this is going to wrap it up for part 1 of this tutorial series. So I hope you're easily able to follow along, and I hope you've been enjoying it so far, and thank you for watching. So I'll be uploading one part each day on my YouTube channel, so when the next part is released, it'll be right up there on the end screen and also the link in the description. And these free videos are made possible thanks to my supporters. So if you'd like to join my supporters in helping out this channel, then some great ways to do that are by checking out my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, where you can get lots of Blender content like 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node setups, and much more Blender content. And you can also purchase the finished project files of this entire tutorial series, and you can get all the 3D models and the finished animated scene and the different resources like the sound effects. You can find the links to that in the description if you're interested in purchasing the project files. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 2.